Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take complex analyses, stacks of research, and we try to boil it all down, giving you that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. Today, we're plunging into the Balkans. It's a region that, well, for centuries, it's been this crossroads, this flashpoint for major powers. And you might be thinking, why the Balkans? Why has this area held such consistent, almost, magnetic interest for a major international military alliance?
Yeah, it's a really good question because for a lot of people, the Balkans might seem sort of peripheral, maybe a distant corner of Europe. But as the analysis we're looking at shows, it's actually seen as this crucial contact zone. Strategically indispensable, really. Think of it like a bridge, a natural bridge connecting these broad strategic lines right across the continent. And that geographical fact, as we'll unpack, it gives us a pretty big clue about this alliance's, well, enduring interest.
Exactly. So our mission today, we're doing a deep dive into some recent, quite detailed academic analysis. It focuses specifically on the consequences and also the future perspectives of this major military alliance's activities right there in the Balkans. This isn't just about, catching headlines. We're talking about a significant body of work, giving a unique lens on these big geopolitical shifts, helping you understand what's really going on beneath the surface in this, let's face it, very complex region.
And this deep dive should help you navigate all that complexity, maybe give you those aha moments about a region whose importance is, frankly, often critically underestimated. The analysis points to how this alliance, even though the Balkans weren't widely integrated into its structure back during the Cold War, and so, well, except for one country, it still maintained this significant interest. And it's effectively become the key factor in regional security. Singularly important.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We're looking at how a major military alliance deeply influenced a region that maybe at first glance seems like it was outside its traditional sphere of interest. And it's not just about who's a member and who isn't. It's about this underlying strategic relevance that goes back decades.
That's exactly it. And what's really fascinating, as the sources really emphasize, is this idea of the region as a crucial contact zone, that bridge connecting broad strategic lines. That's the key to understanding this enduring interest. Even during the Cold War, most Balkan states weren't members, bar one exception, as I mentioned. But the alliance still maintained a remarkably high level of interest. Their attention was constant, even if direct involvement wasn't always obvious from the outside.
So why was it so important back then, even before lots of countries joined? It sounds like it was less about formal treaties at that
Yeah.
stage and more about just, well, geography demanding attention.
Precisely. The Balkans just are a critical contact zone, a vital link between Europe and the Middle East. Our sources describe it as, yeah, a bridge, connecting this broad strategic line stretching all the way from the Baltic Sea up north, right down to Anatolia in the south. So that unique positioning meant the region was always critical for influence. Didn't matter about formal membership during the Cold War. It was always a strategic chessboard. Even if the pieces weren't officially aligned. That inherent strategic value kept it constantly in focus for anyone concerned with continental stability or, frankly, power projection.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. It's about access, control, projecting power over a wider area,
Yeah.
influencing trade, military movements, everything. And then the sources point to a really significant shift after the Cold War ended. What they reveal about this period, it really sheds new light on the alliance's strategy, doesn't it? Can you describe that shift for us?
Absolutely. The sources highlight a fundamental change from that, maybe more indirect or cautious interest. In the post-Cold War era, especially within that context of a unipolar world, where one power really held sway, this alliance adopted a much more, let's say, aggressive approach. And this wasn't just diplomacy. It involved launching numerous direct initiatives. We're talking active military, political, diplomatic actions, all designed to establish deep, undeniable influence. And this really transformed the alliance into the key factor in regional security. A big contrast to earlier, the sources mentioned that a key member state moved quickly, establishing extensive contacts, signing military agreements, setting up bases across the region, all under this umbrella of integrating into the alliance. It was a profound shift from just watching to being forcefully embedded.
Okay, so much more direct, hands-on, maybe even forceful, embedding itself rather than just observing. And our sources pinpoint the Yugoslav wars as a critical testing ground for this new, more assertive strategic function. This is where it gets really revealing, isn't it? Especially when we look at these insights from that 2000 Bratislava conference.
Yes, absolutely. The insights from that confidential letter by Willy Wimmer, he was vice president of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, then detailing the conclusions from a closed conference in Bratislava in April 2000. They're quite illuminating. This conference, organized by a major State Department and a prominent think tank, it revealed some specific, very significant strategic goals. Goals that honestly seem quite astonishing in their scope and implications. It's like a rare look behind the curtain at high-level thinking.
So what were some of these striking points? Because the source lays out quite a few that seem to directly challenge, well, existing international norms and laws.
Indeed, the details are stark. First, the conference organizers demanded rapid international recognition of a specific new state among allied countries. Second, they asserted that a particular regional state was, in their view, effectively outside any legal order. They specifically mentioned a key European foundational document, the Helsinki Final Act, saying it was irrelevant to that state's status.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's not just challenging legal frameworks, that's outright dismissing them in specific cases.
Yeah.
What else came out of this conference?
Well, there was this explicit statement that a war had been waged to correct a wrong decision from a past global conflict, purely for strategic reasons. And this, they argued, necessitated a permanent military presence, the wrong decision they were talking about. It refers directly to General Eisenhower's decision during World War II not to push further into Central Europe. The sources suggest this past decision, or maybe the lack of troop deployment then, was seen as fostering suspicion, especially towards communist Yugoslavia. So the conference argued that a permanent military presence now would finally correct that historical error and ensure lasting dominance in the region.
So it wasn't just about the immediate conflict. It was about fixing perceived historical mistakes to ensure long-term strategic control. That's quite a reinterpretation of history.
Exactly. And then there was a proposal to reestablish a specific territorial situation stretching across a vast area between the Baltic Sea and Anatolia. That implicitly suggests going back to older historical precedents, reshaping the map to fit these long-term strategic ambitions for that whole corridor. And maybe even more significantly, the idea of permanently excluding a certain country from European development was floated, explicitly to ensure uninterrupted military presence for a major global power. It was about creating the conditions for indefinite military access and control.
And then, maybe the most profound point, prioritizing the right of peoples to self-determination over all other rules of international law in any process. That sounds like a fundamental challenge to the whole system.
Yeah, if you connect the dots, these conference points weren't just, theoretical discussions. They look like strategic directives, aimed at fundamentally reshaping the regional political and legal landscape. The implications are huge. A direct challenge to existing international law, to the very concept of national sovereignty as we usually understand it. The source says these points fit into a clearly defined strategic goal, expanding the alliance into the Balkans, all framed within projecting this new territorial situation from the Baltic to Anatolia. It implies a vision where the alliance's strategic interests dictate how international law and sovereignty are applied, rather than adhering to universal principles.
And the sources detail how the Yugoslav Civil War became the proving ground for this new strategic function. The alliance's involvement was staged, moving from place to place, and crucially, it wasn't an end in itself. It was a means to bring new states into the alliance and solidify its influence.
That's right. The involvement unfolded in phases, quite calculated, moving sequentially. Croatia, then through Bosnia, finally to Kosovo. In Croatia and Bosnia, you had the Washington Agreement in March 1994. Mediated by a major power, it politically ended the Croat-Muslim conflict there. That was a key step. It aligned former enemies Croats and Bosnian Muslims against a new common target, the Serbs. And that immediately opened the door for full military support from the alliance, which then allowed a key member state to insist on multinational participation in future operations, strategically turning potential unilateral actions into alliance-led ones, expanding its direct operational role.
And the support showed up in major military operations, like Operation Storm, August-September 1995. The sources say the alliance was involved from planning right through to bombing. Can you elaborate on the scale and, well, the controversy around that?
Yes, the sources note the alliance participated in the Croatian military police Operation Storm right from the start. Planning, intelligence gathering, surveying terrain, enemy forces all the way to direct bombing of radar centers, airports, command posts. Now, the source does state this isn't exactly a popular topic within the alliance, but it highlights a really controversial perspective from Portuguese General Carlos Martins Branco. He described the operation as brutal ethnic cleansing, even raised hypotheses of genocide. noting indiscriminate executions, large-scale murders of civilians, and the forced displacement of hundreds of thousands. That perspective suggests a deeply troubling outcome for an operation where the alliance played such a direct hands-on role.
That is a very stark, disturbing assessment, one you don't often hear in the mainstream narrative. So this wasn't just peacekeeping, it was about achieving specific results. And the sources reveal some pretty grim assessments of those results, especially regarding displaced people. What about Operation Deliberate Force in September 95?
Right, Operation Deliberate Force involved bombing a specific regional entity. Again, multinational participation, though it's worth noting about two-thirds of the air raids were by one country's air force. The stated goals were ambitious: change the balance of forces on the ground, take out anti-aircraft defenses, significantly reduce military potential. But the operation was only partially successful. Despite all that military engagement, the peace agreement that followed still resulted in a two-entity structure within that state. That was contrary to the intention for a more centralized, multi-ethnic state. So it shows that even with direct military force, the desired political outcomes weren't always fully achieved. It left unresolved issues.
And the high point of engagement, as it's described, was a direct aggression against a recognized sovereign state in 1998-1999. This seems like where the alliance's new strategic function was most explicitly tested, wouldn't you say?
It really was the peak, yes. Direct aggression against an internationally recognized sovereign state. And importantly, carried out without UN Security Council approval, plus using what the sources call a very problematic argument to start the campaign. This refers to the fact that the alleged war crimes used as the main justification for the bombing were later questioned, and in some cases, never actually proven by international bodies. The clear goal, according to these sources, was direct assistance to a specific ethnic group to later declare independence. This marked a critical, really unprecedented shift. The alliance actively involved itself in reshaping sovereign territory, violently changing existing international borders. The sources stress that the alliance used military forces directly without any hesitation to conduct operations that could have helped it fulfill strategic goals. And that a specific factor, meaning a particular ethnic group, was continuously portrayed negatively because it stood in the way of these goals. This ultimately led to supporting separatism and the unilateral changing of borders of recognized states.
So the argument here is that the alliance's actions were driven primarily by its own strategic goals, even if it meant overriding international law and consensus, which leads us straight to this concept of a new legal order in Europe. That sounds like a truly profound shift.
It really does raise a critical question for you, the listener. What happens when international norms get unilaterally redefined, especially by powerful actors? The events described suggest the Balkans became this crucible, right? A test field for forging a new paradigm in international relations. The sources argue the alliance's actions there, particularly the aggression against a sovereign state and supporting independence, effectively created this new legal order in Europe, where pre-existing rules, like those from the Cold War era, the Helsinki Final Act, were basically no longer uniformly valid in practice. The Balkans served not just to define the alliance's new function, but crucially, to show the consequences for not cooperating with its strategic aims.
And this new legal order involved putting self-determination above established international law, which fundamentally reshaped the map and maybe set a dangerous precedent globally.
Exactly. The source notes it reshaped space and violently changed existing borders. It ties back to that idea of correcting a historical mistake, specifically the 1945 decision about not deploying forces deeper into Central Europe. This suggests the actions were part of a long-term strategic vision, actively reinterpreting and selectively applying international law to fit geopolitical goals. And just to remind listeners about the Badinter rules, these were principles from the early 90s saying Yugoslav Republic borders would become the new independent state borders. The sources clearly state that in Kosovo, this fundamental principle, which was used to recognize many other new states, was selectively ignored. This deliberate non-application of a key norm put the future borders of other Balkan states and potentially others into question.
That sounds like a major turning point in international relations, setting a precedent with implications far beyond the Balkans. And it wasn't just about conflict. It also paved the way for a methodical expansion of the alliance's footprint in the region. This steady expansion shows a clear strategic commitment. But what about the countries that are still outside the alliance?
Well, the expansion initially focused on Eastern and Central Europe after the Berlin Wall fell. Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland joined in '99. But the analysis highlights that after 2004, for quite a long time, the expansion became almost a purely Balkan thing,
Yeah.
really focused on that region until more recent additions elsewhere.
Okay, a very clear regional focus for over a decade. Can you run through the Balkan states that joined later and maybe touch on their strategic significance?
Sure. In 2004, you had Bulgaria, Romania, and Slovenia. Bulgaria and Romania are vital, giving access to the Black Sea coast, controlling key east-west strategic directions. Slovenia secures a key spot in the northern Adriatic, controlling routes along a major river valley, sort of a gateway to Central Europe. Then, 2009, Croatia and Albania joined. Croatia gives a dominant position in the Central Adriatic, crucial for naval control, and controls routes from the Pannonian Plain. Albania provides a key position in the southern Adriatic, controlling a strategic direction from the Adriatic towards the Black Sea. Montenegro joined in 2017, creating what the sources call an Adriatic troika with Albania and Croatia, fully securing that vital Adriatic coastal route. And finally, North Macedonia in 2020. That essentially completed control over a southern route from the Adriatic to the Black Sea, and crucially, controlled the key regional traffic route, the Balkan Vertical, a major transport corridor. So each addition meticulously reinforced the alliance's physical presence and control over vital geography, sea lanes, and logistics in the region.
A clear, step-by-step strategic acquisition, securing key positions piece by piece. But even with all these new members, two Balkan countries, Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, are still outside. How does the alliance maintain influence there?
That's correct. Only Serbia and B&H remain outside. But, the source points out, the alliance is still a hugely important security factor in both, partly because they're geographically almost surrounded by alliance members. Plus, the alliance maintains a very active and legally entrenched presence within their territories.
So even without full membership, the alliance has a major footprint in both nations, influencing from inside and out. Let's dive into the presence in Kosovo first. The sources highlight a pretty unique arrangement there.
Yeah, in Kosovo, alliance forces are deployed extensively under specific international missions, and our sources detail the really extraordinary provisions of a significant international plan, often called the Comprehensive Proposal for the Status Settlement. This plan actually became the basis for the Unilateral Declaration of Independence and is effectively part of its constitution, outlining how power works.
What are the specific provisions defining this authority? It sounds incredibly comprehensive, almost like a separate legal system for the alliance there.
They are remarkably comprehensive, like a parallel legal order, as you say. The alliance's military presence operates under its own direct authority and political control, independent of local institutions. Its chief is explicitly the supreme authority on all military aspects of the settlement, with the sole right to interpret those aspects. They have the unimpeded right to use necessary force, free movement anywhere, immediate and full military control over all airspace, and the unrestricted right to conduct inspections wherever they deem necessary. And local institutions are explicitly obliged to guarantee these forces extensive privileges and complete immunity.
Wow, that's an extraordinary level of power, effectively creating a zone where local laws don't fully apply to them. And the sources stress this setup excludes the alliance from any real control by local authorities or even international civilian missions.
Precisely. The most influence local or international civilian bodies can have are just consultations and coordination. There's no real oversight, no accountability to the local side. The head of the military presence doesn't even have to formally report to any civilian official or body. A former legal expert from the region, analyzing the proposal, went so far as to ask if it means a military alliance creating its own state within a state, where civilian structures just cannot limit military power. It suggests a unique kind of military sovereignty operating within that territory.
That's really where the unique nature of this engagement becomes clearest. Acting like a sovereign master in that territory above local government. It raises profound questions about accountability, governance, sovereignty itself for Kosovo. What about Bosnia and Herzegovina? The sources also mention a significant military, political, and legal dimension to the alliance's presence there too.
In B&H, the presence comes directly from the Paris Dayton Peace Agreement, which ended the war there. The document explicitly states the alliance may establish such a force which will operate under the authority and subject to the direction and political control of its council. So the political and military command structure for these forces is clearly defined, embedded right in the state's foundational agreement. It's not just a temporary deployment, it's woven into the country's post-conflict governance fabric.
And this influence has lasted, even as mission names changed over the years, suggesting the underlying power structure remains.
Yes. Despite the names changing UNPROFOR to IFOR to SFOR, then EUFOR Althea in 2004, the fundamental influence and operational framework are still there. Even now, with the EU military staff leading the mission, they basically use the alliance's operational HQ and work through its command structure. So the label might change, the lead flag might shift, but the core influence, the operational backbone, is inextricably linked to the alliance. It's also worth noting that BNH's path into the alliance has been consistently blocked by one of its entities, Republika Srpska, despite different feelings in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. That internal division adds another layer of complexity.
So we've seen how this alliance has meticulously embedded itself across the region, even in non-member states, established itself as this undeniable security player. But this deep involvement hasn't come without serious challenges and, well, profound consequences, often unforeseen. The sources highlight significant problems in actually implementing its intentions, stemming right from its actions during the war and its approach to different populations.
Yeah, this is a critical point about legitimacy. It really underpins a lot of the alliance's current difficulties. Our sources indicate that despite being such a key factor, the alliance faces real problems achieving its long-term goals, mainly because of a deep crisis of legitimacy among certain groups. A primary, very powerful example is public opinion in Serbia. For over 15 years now, consistently, over 80% of people in opinion surveys say they are against joining this alliance. This isn't just a blip, it's deeply ingrained, remarkably stable, and incredibly difficult to shift. The sources emphasize that no government in Serbia could easily go against such a clear, overwhelming popular will. It creates a kind of permanent political barrier to full integration.
That's fascinating, how past actions continue to shape current views so powerfully. When over 80% consistently feel that way, it's a huge, almost insurmountable hurdle for any external actor. And this legitimacy crisis seems tied to the alliance being seen as taking sides during the conflicts.
Absolutely. The sources argue very strongly that the alliance consistently siding with certain groups, the Croat Muslim coalition, specific Croat factions, Bosnian Muslims, but critically, never with the Serbs, that directly contributes to this enduring legitimacy crisis. And this perceived partisanship is complicated further by other factors, like influential religious institutions and the complex way the population is spread out across the region, even after displacements. This widespread negative feeling within a major ethnic group, spanning the whole region, poses this persistent, significant challenge to the alliance's legitimacy and its ability to gain full acceptance.
Let's look at Montenegro. The sources call it a potential nightmare scenario for the alliance. Its independence was linked to the alliance wanting further fragmentation, wanting new members.
Indeed. Montenegro is particularly illustrative. The 2006 independence referendum there, it was marked by widespread irregularities. It led to a society that's still permanently polarized. The qualified majority needed 55% was just barely met, 55.49% voted for dissolution. That razor-thin margin sowed deep divisions right away. Plus, despite what the sources call an overwhelming majority of people being against joining the alliance, no referendum on membership was allowed. Instead, the decision was made by a simple parliamentary majority, from elections also described as irregular, which it seems Western actors overlooked because it served the clear purpose of advancing alliance expansion.
And the sources mention external structures actively invested in building a hybrid nation there.
That sounds quite provocative. It is. The sources contend that, in agreement with Montenegro's long-term leader, external structures invested heavily in building this hybrid Montenegrin nation based on an extreme anti-Serbian discourse. This was seen as a deliberate attempt to counter the influence of the Serbian population and its ties to Serbia, the factor, seen as hindering integration into the alliance. But this deeply divisive project ultimately led to that leader's downfall. And it triggered a fierce institutional and political crisis that's been ongoing since 2020. The source states unequivocally that because of all this, the decision to join the alliance fundamentally lacks legitimacy for a large part of the population. So the alliance is seen as pushing actions against the will of most citizens, like Montenegro recognizing Kosovo's independence.
This really raises a critical question for you to consider. What happens when joining such a major body is seen as lacking domestic legitimacy? Especially when the process feels externally driven. It highlights the fragility of these top-down integration efforts when they clash so hard with internal social dynamics and popular feeling. And the sources call Montenegro's situation schizophrenic.
Yes, schizophrenic, because Montenegro feels compelled to stay a member. It lacks independent power militarily, economically, politically. It realistically can't be the first country to just withdraw, given the geopolitics. But this forced situation generates continuous, severe internal political problems and tensions. It constantly destabilizes the country as long as this dynamic holds. The internal divisions, the resentment, that deep sense of disenfranchisement, it just keeps simmering under the surface, creating a really volatile domestic situation.
A country caught in a very tough spot. And similar things, maybe less intense, are seen in North Macedonia. The sources suggest external lobbying for another country's entry actually fueled separatist hopes within North Macedonia itself.
That's right. The source indicates that to strengthen the position of a specific ethnic group in the Balkans, there was active lobbying for a neighboring country to join the alliance. And this, in turn, directly influenced and amplified separatist ambitions among the same ethnic group inside North Macedonia. So, to prevent a breakup scenario like Bosnia or Kosovo, foreign policy shifted towards drawing North Macedonia into the alliance, to make the alliance seem like the only guarantor of maintaining territorial integrity, a powerful incentive for a nation worried about internal divisions.
And its entry was blocked for years until that name change happened, which was also highly controversial, wasn't it?
Yes. The solution that finally allowed entry, renaming the country Republic of North Macedonia, was achieved without direct citizen support. No referendum was held. This decision left society deeply polarized, created huge rifts. Interethnic tensions got worse. Some ethnic groups supported the name change, seeing benefits. Others fiercely opposed it, seeing it as an attack on their national identity, their history. And this outcome then led to that blackmailing policy from another neighbor, blocking North Macedonia's EU talks over identity issues, which in turn provoked strong reactions from other regional powers who saw it as reviving old regional division plans. Again, highlighting how external pressures and internal divisions, even when solutions are imposed for integration, can paradoxically create new, complex, lasting problems.
Both Montenegro and North Macedonia really illustrate the deep internal costs of these externally driven integration paths, where pursuing strategic goals can unintentionally sow seeds of internal instability. But the challenges don't stop there. One particular territory, the sources say, stands out as the biggest challenge to the alliance's legitimacy.
Kosovo. The sources describe Kosovo as the biggest, most enduring challenge, symbolizing how the alliance explicitly violated those Cold War-era rules on border inviolability, and in doing so, acted as a military instrument for what was then a unipolar world order. It's seen as a direct reflection of that period when one global power's worldview really dominated international decisions.
And the analysis points out apparent double standards regarding Kosovo. That's a powerful accusation.
Yes, the analysis doesn't hold back on highlighting perceived double standards. While the alliance and its members strongly criticize similar actions by other global powers, like referendums in contested territories during conflicts, calling them illegal, it didn't just support Kosovo's independence, it actively pressured others to accept it. This highlights a profound, difficult-to-reconcile inconsistency in applying international law and principles. The analysis suggests the mistake made by the alliance in Kosovo is disproportionate to Kosovo's actual strategic importance, arguing that over time, the alliance's position there became unsustainable, even part of the problem, not the solution for regional stability.
This really makes you wonder. When applying international principles becomes so selective, what does it do to the credibility of the institutions supposedly upholding them? The Kosovo example shows an inconsistency that still echoes today. And the sources point out how this also undermined fundamental rules about borders.
That's right. Violating the Badinter rules, which, as we discussed, set republic borders as the new state borders, fundamentally questioned the future borders of other Balkan states. Kosovo, as an autonomous province, didn't have the right to self-determination under those specific rules, yet that principle was selectively applied and aggressively pushed. The alliance, the sources say, naively expected that just by pressuring Serbia, it would accept what the source calls its wrongdoing, and that would be the end of it, solidify the new reality. But that expectation was indeed naive, and aggressively violating those principles now critically calls into question the future territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina and North Macedonia, and maybe others.
So the strategy of fragmenting space to gain influence had these dual contradictory outcomes. From the alliance's view, it was about strategic wins. But for local people, it created a lasting burden.
That's exactly the dual outcome. On one hand, for the alliance, fragmenting space, creating dependent state-like creations like Kosovo, achieved that correction of Eisenhower's mistake. It meant deploying troops, establishing firm political control, getting a long-term strategic foothold. On the other hand, for local populations, it created widespread, lasting resentment against the alliance, fundamentally questioning its legitimacy. This odium, this deep negative feeling, is, according to the sources, a much bigger issue than the expansion itself. Profound, lasting liability. Plus, these dependent territories, maybe initially seen as profitable markets or assets, have become increasingly expensive clients needing constant subsidies, turning them into a persistent cost for the West and the alliance. A cost the analysis argues is no longer justified by their strategic importance. Kosovo is cited as the prime example of this economic burden and strategic tussle.
So, what does all this mean for the alliance's position in the Balkans going forward? It seems they paid a very high-priced legitimacy, financial cost for what they achieved. And this raises real questions about future sustainability, doesn't it?
Indeed, it does. The analysis argues pretty forcefully that the whole international security environment has fundamentally changed. Changed in the 2 decades since that specific aggressive act by the alliance, which was meant to establish its dominance, to be the pinnacle of preemptive action. That act was meant to send this clear, unchallengeable message of unipolar power. Yet, well, almost nothing in world politics stayed the same after that. The unipolar moment passed. New dynamics are very much in play now.
And this shift allowed other major global powers to come back as increasingly important regional security actors, exploiting perceived mistakes or vacuums left by the alliance.
Exactly. These powers have effectively used the perceived mistakes and inconsistencies of the alliance and other international bodies to reestablish their own influence. One major global power, for instance, has strongly backed international law in regional conflicts, consistently preventing changes to existing agreements, especially regarding Bosnia and Herzegovina and that key UN Security Council resolution on Kosovo. Another major global power has skillfully used huge investment projects, like the Belt and Road Initiative, to fill economic gaps deliberately left by others in Balkan economies. By 2020, the landscape had definitively changed. While the alliance was still a key security factor, it was demonstrably no longer the only one, and certainly not the unchallenged power it once aimed to be.
The world stage isn't the same, and the Balkans reflect these larger power shifts. The analysis then paints a pretty concerning future scenario. The Balkans potentially becoming a new military base, a front line in a bigger geopolitical fight.
Yes, it posits a deeply worrying future. If a strategy of total opposition to a major global power continues, the analysis warns the Balkans could be assigned the role of a new military base, becoming an integral part of what it calls an Eastern European battlefield. This would involve continual pressures and provocations coming from the Balkans towards another power's interest zone, manifesting militarily, politically, economically. It's a vision of the region as a perpetual zone of tension, a strategic pawn.
So one potential future sees the Balkans becoming basically a strategic outpost, a forward base in a larger struggle. But the sources highlight some major problems with this whole military base idea. What are the 3 core problems they identify?
Right. The first big problem is economic and social incompleteness. Becoming a military base would leave the already vulnerable Balkans economically and socially incomplete, deepening that perennial lag behind Western Europe. The practical implications are pretty grim. Who would invest meaningfully in a region that's essentially just a military staging ground? How would normal economic life, social life, function under permanent insecurity with tensions always high? The analysis suggests a potential Ukrainization of the Balkans. And to be clear, what the sources mean by that term is a future where money mainly goes to arming the region, building military infrastructure, funding propaganda, fostering anti-sentiment towards another power, but very little for actual economic development, improving quality of life, building sustainable societies. This would be devastating, especially with rising prices and falling living standards already hurting the region. It paints a bleak economic picture, leaving people in a state of constant struggle.
That's a very grim outlook for the region's development, sacrificing long-term well-being for geopolitics. What's the second problem with this strategy?
The second problem questions the actual capability and readiness of the alliance and its partners to effectively manage such a complex and volatile battlefield. The analysis points to past debacles, failures, what it calls an essential show of weakness, in other global conflict zones, referencing past withdrawals, unfulfilled promises of help in ongoing conflicts. It highlights how complex Balkan relations are much more intricate than, say, the Baltic region, with deep historical grievances, diverse groups, unresolved issues. The alliance, the sources argue, has consistently struggled to get its desired outcomes in the Balkans, like changing internal agreements or stopping influential religious institutions from taking certain actions. The whole idea of mobilizing Balkan nations for an exhausting hybrid war is presented as highly unrealistic.
Mhm.
The sources warn that just using impositions, threats, and intimidation won't work anymore and could even lead to the collapse of state systems that have gotten used to a clientelist relationship, making things even more fragile.
So not just costly, but potentially ineffective given the region's complexities and the alliance's own track record elsewhere. And the third crucial problem.
The third problem is the inevitable risk of powerful countermeasures and widespread chaotization. It's extremely naive, the analysis warns, to expect no reaction from the opposing global power. And the analysis suggests conditions in the Balkans might even be more favorable than elsewhere for that power to expand its activities, given the existing grievances and vulnerabilities. It issues a stark warning. Military base status means the conflict would inevitably happen within the region itself, leading to extreme internal destabilization, deepening the already existing interethnic and interstate tensions, destroying public trust in leaders, and causing comprehensive chaotization. The conflict would be internal, tearing the region apart from within, turning it into a perpetual battleground for outside interests.
These 3 points paint a truly stark, unsettling picture of what that military base scenario could mean. It's not just about an external threat. It's about the internal cost, the potential for a self-defeating strategy, and profound suffering for the people there. So, the current path seems filled with danger, deeply unsustainable. What's the alternative the sources suggest for Balkan stability, even if it feels, a bit like a distant dream right now?
Well, the analysis argues that stabilizing the Balkans really needs a different way of thinking, one that explicitly avoids turning the region into a military camp. Now, concepts like a new Balkan Confederation or Union, they might seem naive or utopian given current interests of the alliance or other global powers. The source acknowledges that. But it emphasizes how irresponsible and disturbing it is not to think about these alternatives, considering the potentially catastrophic results of the current trajectory.
So, a long-term vision that sees the current obstacles but insists on looking beyond them, recognizing the present course just isn't sustainable.
Exactly. The analysis suggests a sustainable solution could involve new forms of connection beyond the foreseen bloc division. This would need security guarantees from both Western actors and other global powers, creating a balanced, mutually assured framework for peace. Alongside this, it would require patiently solving internal issues within the region, maybe delaying grand solutions where none are obvious right now, taking intermediate steps to constantly reduce conflict potential. This kind of multifaceted approach, challenging as it is, could build a new foundation for wider integration and real stability in Southeast Europe, moving away from this legacy of conflict and external manipulation.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, it definitely leaves us with a lot to think about. While the alliance has certainly established itself as a key security factor in the Balkans, it seems it's paid a very high price. In legitimacy, in consequences that are hard to fix, potentially even creating challenges for itself down the line. Could the very strategies used to gain influence in the past become the Achilles heel for future stability, especially in this changing world?
Yeah, and that really raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider. In an increasingly multipolar world, how might the lessons learned from the Balkans, especially about selectively applying international law, about the long-term costs of intervention, how might those lessons reshape our understanding of international engagement and regional security? For better or perhaps for worse, the Balkan issue, maybe it won't single-handedly tear down the alliance, but it certainly seems capable of significantly contributing to breaking down its credibility, maybe even its decomposition, by constantly exposing the problems stemming from its past mistakes and their profound, lasting consequences.